What would you sacrifice for the thing you love most? Pause for a moment and truly ask yourself that question. Would you sacrifice your comfort, your safety, your recognition, your health? Most of us hesitate. Most of us draw a line somewhere, a reasonable, sensible, perfectly human line, and we say, this far and no further. But every generation, if it is lucky, produces one soul who draws no such line. One person who looks at everything the world demands and everything it takes away, the pain, the politics, the persecution, the slow erosion of the body, and says quietly, without drama, without complaint, it does not matter, the song must go on. That woman existed. Russia knew her voice. The world is poorer without it. And today, we are going to talk about what she gave, what was taken from her, and why, long after the powerful men who tried to diminish her have turned to dust, her echo still fills every room it enters. Valentina Tolkunova was not simply a popular singer in the conventional sense of the word. She represented something far deeper and more significant in the cultural and emotional landscape of Soviet and post-Soviet Russia. Born in 1946, she grew up in a country that was rebuilding itself after the devastation of World War II, and her music carried within it the quiet resilience, tenderness, and emotional depth that defined ordinary Russian life during those decades. Her voice was not the loud, theatrical kind that demanded attention. It was soft, warm, and intimate, the kind of voice that felt like it was singing directly to one person rather than to a crowd of thousands. This quality made her extraordinarily unique among her contemporaries. While other performers of her era leaned into grandeur and spectacle, Tolkunova leaned into simplicity and sincerity, and the Russian people responded to that with a love that lasted her entire lifetime and far beyond it. The nickname Soul of Russia was not assigned to her by any official body or cultural institution. It was given to her organically by the people themselves, because they genuinely felt that her music expressed something they carried inside but could never quite put into words. Her songs spoke of everyday human experiences: love, longing, the bond between mother and child, the beauty of the Russian countryside, the quiet passage of time, and she delivered these themes with such natural grace that generations of listeners felt personally understood by her art. That connection between artist and audience is one of the rarest things in the world of performance, and Tolkunova possessed it completely and effortlessly throughout her entire career. The relationship between genuinely popular artists and the Soviet cultural establishment was rarely simple or comfortable, and Tolkunova's experience was no exception to this pattern. The Soviet system had a well-developed mechanism for controlling cultural output through organizations like the Ministry of Culture and the ideological departments of the Communist Party's Central Committee. These bodies determined which artists received state support, which performances were approved, which songs could be broadcast on state television and radio, and ultimately which careers flourished and which were quietly suppressed. For an artist like Tolkunova, whose appeal was rooted in deeply human and spiritual themes rather than ideological celebration, navigating this system required constant careful negotiation. The Soviet cultural apparatus was most comfortable with art that celebrated the achievements of the socialist state, glorified collective labor, or promoted patriotic sentiment in ways that aligned with official narratives. Tolkunova's music did none of these things in any direct or obvious way. Instead, it spoke to the interior life of ordinary people, their private joys and sorrows, their family bonds, their quiet faith in something greater than politics. This made her beloved by the public, but sometimes viewed with suspicion or indifference by cultural officials who could not easily categorize or instrumentalize her work. There were reportedly periods in her career when she found it difficult to secure broadcast time, performance opportunities, or official recognition commensurate with her actual popularity. The friction was rarely open or dramatic. The Soviet system preferred subtle obstruction to outright confrontation with beloved public figures. But it was real. and it left its mark on her professional life in ways that those outside the system could only partially observe. Perhaps the most heartbreaking dimension of Valentina Tolkunova's life story is the extent to which she sacrificed her physical health in service of her art and her audiences. For approximately 26 years, she reportedly endured ongoing medical treatments and injections simply to maintain her ability to continue performing. This was not a minor inconvenience or a temporary setback. It was a sustained, decades-long ordeal that ran parallel to her entire mature career and colored every performance she gave with an element of quiet heroism that most of her audiences could never have suspected. The nature of a performer's life in the Soviet and post-Soviet entertainment industry was extremely demanding. Tours were long, conditions were often difficult, and the expectation was that artists would fulfill their obligations regardless of personal circumstances. There was very little room in that culture for an artist to step back, rest, and prioritize their own well-being over the demands of the schedule. Tolkunova internalized this ethic completely and applied it to herself with uncompromising severity. When her health deteriorated, she did not retire from the stage or reduce her commitments in any significant way. She managed her condition medically and continued performing. This decision reflected both the depth of her dedication and the particular kind of artistic identity she had constructed over the course of her career, one in which the audience's experience and the integrity of the performance always came before her own comfort or safety. It is impossible to listen to recordings of her later performances with this knowledge in mind without feeling a profound sense of both admiration and sorrow, because what sounds like pure, effortless artistry was being produced at an enormous and largely invisible personal cost. Valentina Tolkunova's commitment to live performance was not simply professional discipline. It was a fundamental expression of who she was as an artist and as a human being. For her, the stage was not a workplace or a venue for self-promotion. It was a sacred space of communion between herself and the people who came to hear her, and she treated that relationship with absolute seriousness and reverence. This philosophy shaped every aspect of her approach to her career. She was known for the care she brought to every performance, regardless of the size of the venue or the prestige of the occasion. Whether she was singing in a major concert hall in Moscow or performing for workers in a provincial town, she brought the same level of emotional investment and artistic integrity because she believed that every audience deserved her absolute best. This democratization of artistic effort was deeply rooted in her character and her understanding of what music was for. She did not see her gift as something to be rationed according to the importance of the occasion. She saw it as something to be given fully and freely every single time she stepped onto a stage. The Russian artistic tradition has long Health declined in her final years was the ultimate expression of this philosophy, a last act of devotion that her audiences recognized instinctively and responded to with overwhelming love and gratitude. One of the most distinctive and ultimately consequential features of Valentina Tolkunova's artistic identity was the nature of the themes she chose to explore in her music. In an era when Soviet cultural production was expected to reflect and reinforce the values of the socialist state, Tolkunova gravitated consistently toward themes that were more ancient, more personal, and more spiritually resonant than official ideology could comfortably accommodate. Her songs celebrated motherhood not as a civic duty, but as a profound and sacred human bond. They evoked love of the Russian homeland not in terms of military glory or socialist achievement, but in terms of landscape, memory, and the quiet beauty of ordinary places. They touched on themes of faith, of longing, of the passage of time, and of the deep human need for connection and meaning. themes that belong to no ideology and cannot be commandeered by any political system without being fundamentally distorted. This quality made her music timeless in a way that overtly political art rarely manages to be, but it also created a kind of invisible tension with the cultural authorities of her time. Soviet ideologues were most comfortable with art they could point to as evidence of the system's success. Tolkunova's art was not about the system at all. It was about the human heart, which exists independently of any political arrangement and whose needs do not change regardless of who holds power. The spiritual dimension of her work was particularly sensitive in the Soviet context, where official atheism was not merely a philosophical position, but an actively enforced cultural policy. Her ability to evoke genuine spiritual feeling without ever directly challenging state ideology was a kind of artistic genius, but it was also a source of ongoing tension that followed her throughout her career. Valentina Tolkunova passed away on the 22nd of March 2010 after a prolonged battle with serious illness. She was 63 years old. Her death was mourned across Russia and the former Soviet republics with an outpouring of public grief that reflected the depth and breadth of the love she had accumulated over more than 4 decades of performing. State officials, fellow artists, and ordinary citizens alike expressed their sorrow. But the most meaningful tributes came from the countless ordinary people who wrote, spoke, and shared memories of what her music had meant to them personally, how a particular song had accompanied a significant moment in their lives, how her voice had comforted them during a period of difficulty, how her performances had given them something they could not find anywhere else. This kind of legacy is not manufactured by publicity campaigns or institutional recognition. It grows organically over years and decades through the accumulated weight of genuine human connection, and it is the only form of immortality that art can truly offer its creators. Tolkunova's legacy in Russian culture is secure and enduring precisely because it was never dependent on official approval or political fashion. The committees and cultural bureaucracies that sometimes made her professional life difficult have long since faded into historical footnote. While her recordings continue to be listened to, her songs continue to be sung, and her name continues to be spoken with warmth and reverence by people who never met her, but who feel, nonetheless, that she was somehow part of their lives.